All right, good afternoon, everybody. From BWF, this is Next Gen Annual Giving, where we discuss the changes, big and small, in annual giving and digital fundraising. Today, we are talking about pipeline development. It's one of my absolute favorite topics. It's certainly something that is of growing importance in the Next Gen Annual Giving philosophy. I have been so excited about the opportunity to talk about this today, and I just can't wait to get started. I'm James Barnard, Associate Vice President at BWF. We are a full-service philanthropic consulting firm based in Minneapolis, and we have team members around the world. I'm joining you today from my home in sunny, beautiful Orlando. At BWF, we work with fundraising organizations in healthcare, higher education, and all kinds of NGOs and national nonprofits. I have to tell you, I love my job. I get to work with an amazing team at BWF, some of the absolute smartest people I know. You know, it's really just a bunch of people geeking out about fundraising, which really makes for a great place to work. And as much as I learn from my colleagues, I learn a ton, if not more, from our incredible clients. On that note, I want to give a quick shout out to friends at the University of Utah. I just flew back home this morning on the red-eye flight from Salt Lake City. So if I have bags under my eyes, forgive me. That's why. It's been a very long day. I was on site with the amazing team at Utah, working with them on their giving day. So I want to give a shout out to Rachel Robertson and her team on another absolutely fantastic giving day there. What an honor it was to be part of that and work with their team. Speaking of giving days, what a great tie-in to today's topic that we're here to discuss. If you're a bit confused by that, I hope you won't be by the end of this session. And the title today, you might call a big, hairy, audacious title, How to Make Your Annual Giving Program a Pipeline Powerhouse. Yeah, we went with the term powerhouse, perhaps a little ambitious here. We could have said how to make your annual giving program a pipeline contributor, but no, we went big. Go big, go home. We said pipeline powerhouse. You know, I like ambitious goals that inspire action, and I think this one sets the right tone for how we should be reimagining next gen annual giving. For a long time, I felt that annual giving programs can do more to fuel the mid-level and major giving pipeline. And what's more, I think that a lot of annual giving teams stand ready to do this important work, but sometimes they're held back. They're held back by their goals, their objectives, the metrics, the things that they're asked to do that force them into a corner, focusing on getting gifts today. And that doesn't always help you out with the pipeline. So as we get started today, like Emily said, we wanted to hear from you. The chat is open. Tell us who you are, who you're representing, where you're tuning in from today. Emily and Karina are standing by, and they're going to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A. They're not afraid to interrupt me. They've done it many times. So as we go on today, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and maybe, just maybe, I'll come up with an answer for you, or I'll come up with some consulting term about deferring and getting back to you on that one. All right, let's take a look at what we're going to be talking about today. Do not adjust your sets. We have a lot to get through. We're going to talk about the opportunity in front of us and why I think this is one that we cannot pass up. We're going to talk about how you can get started with how you can get started with it. Let me start out with that. We're going to talk about how you get started with the same way you get started with anything, which is setting some objectives that align with your big picture goals. And we're going to take a look at the fundraising funnel, and we're going to be discussing the idea of fundraising marketing with lead generation and journeys that are all key to that. And we're going to take a look at some ideas for metrics that will really help you measure your performance. All of these things are really about laying the groundwork for building your pipeline powerhouse. I think it's important to build on a solid foundation. There's going to be plenty of time as well to talk about strategies and tactics too, so don't worry about that. We are going to look at some engagement-driven programs and audience development, and we're going to discuss some of the ways that you can generate leads and how actually you may already be doing a whole lot of this, even if you're not quite tracking it just yet. And then for those of you who are serious about pipeline development and lead generation, we're going to dig into some lead scoring as well towards the end and look at some warming campaigns. I think before we dig into that first agenda item, we should probably set some boundaries about what we're talking about here, and let's define pipeline development. So today I am talking about pipeline development as a strategy for building a sustainable fundraising program with long-term growth goals. Now, I think for many people, pipeline means mid-level and major gift prospects, and in many ways I would agree with that, and that's really a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But also, it is my belief that pipeline development also refers to building a healthy, sustainable annual giving program which is absolutely critical to this next gen annual giving philosophy that I always like to talk about. I think acquisition programs are designed to attract long-term supporters. I think about a sharp focus on retention strategies that help you build for the future, and also incorporating a donor journey in search of sustainable relationships with your constituents. To me, this is what pipeline development is all about. And we did a poll with some of our clients and friends just recently, and we found that only 25% of responders reported a steady flow of leads and referrals. I don't think that's enough. It should be higher than 25%. While 17% said they really had no formalized way of measuring pipeline development. So that's where those metrics are going to get important, and we'll get to that in a little bit. For many, though, there is a belief in the annual giving is there to fuel the pipeline, and it can do that, and it actually is doing that. But those referrals are occasional, they're perhaps inconsistent, and that's really indicative of the opportunity in front of us. Really, the reality is that the world has changed, right? Especially in the last couple of years, this change has been accelerated. Donors have new expectations about the organizations that they support. Why does this matter? Well, creating a pipeline of future supporters requires you to earn their trust, to provide them with value, and essentially give them a reason to stay engaged with your mission. So things like compelling content and personalized interactions, curated experiences, these things are really important now, and they are the expectations of our donors. And when you look at these things, ask yourself, is your annual giving program delivering these for your donors? And it's not meant to sound critical. There's many great programs out there doing great works, but for many, I think there's room we can do to start meeting these expectations more for our donors. You also have to ask yourself what strategies do exist and who's responsible for those. And all of this is to say that I think there is a disconnect and even possibly a contradiction in the objectives of many annual giving programs versus their major gift counterparts. And what I mean by this is that in some cases, these two strategies are competing with each other. So most common annual giving goals require immediate results, right? Like we're here to raise as much money as possible this year and get as many donors by this deadline, whether that's June 30th or December 31st. And then on July 1 or December 1st, you're back to zero. It starts over again. And you really may be disincentivizing annual giving programs from making referrals if they lose the ability to secure a gift from that person and don't have a pipeline metrics to reward that referral. So I think there's a growing need for a systemized lead generation and referral program approach that will support those major gift programs. And we like to say that our annual giving programs support the pipeline, but does it? How does it? I think we all like that story, of the donor who gave $10 30 years ago, and now she gives millions of dollars. It's a great story. How many times has this been replicated in your program? And what are we actually trying to do to make this happen on a regular basis? So here's my thesis. Your annual giving program is uniquely positioned to serve a fundraising marketing function, but this is a big but. To take advantage of this opportunity is going to require intentional innovation. This is where objectives are going to get really important. If you want your annual giving program to fuel that major giving pipeline, you have to make sure that you have the right objectives in place and the right metrics to measure performance. Most programs are going to fall somewhere on this scale of pipeline development to revenue generation. Many will fall somewhere in the middle, and that's okay. It's totally fine that your annual giving program has a goal that's sort of a little bit in the middle of two different things. Now, if pipeline development is a significant part of your objective, are you creating the strategies to help you get there? One of the things we often look at in these programs is donor counts, and that becomes associated with pipeline development. We say, well, annual giving is here to get as many donors as possible. And there's many programs that we work with that's their goal. It's just to get a certain number of donors. Sometimes in higher education, that's alumni donors. In other industries, it's more generic. It's just donors. But that's a very key metric for many programs. And I think that we have to just be a little bit careful about this, because sometimes if donor count is the goal, your program will actually end up using strategies that achieve that high number of donors, but may actually be hurting the pipeline, not helping it. And that doesn't mean you should give up on donors. And it certainly does not mean that we should get comfortable with the fact that donor counts are very much declining for many organizations. Far from it, we should not be comfortable with that. We should not be accepting that. It just means that you need to think bigger than donor counts alone. So let me give an example. In higher education, programs that are laser focused on alumni participation very often will seek to get a gift from as many people as possible in the year. Now, once you have received a gift from an individual, the logical next step is to move on and find your next donor, so to set that individual aside for the rest of the year. That sort of makes a lot of sense, but in reality, a strong donor retention strategy, which would include heavy emphasis on stewardship, is actually going to increase the likelihood of that donor renewing, and then you're going to build your donor counts up in the long term. Actually, a monthly gift would be offer the highest retention rates, but there's really no incentive to get that monthly gift if you're just trying to get as many numbers as possible. And I think, honestly, the pressure is really on program leaders to immediately shift their resources to finding that next donor versus just taking care of the ones you have. So I think for programs that are looking to boost their contribution to the pipeline, we'll talk more later on about some metrics that are worth your consideration, because donor counts may not be exactly the right thing to be looking at. Now, many of you will be looking at this spectrum and thinking that your program lands somewhere in the middle, and that's pretty normal. We've seen that many, many times. I'm curious to hear from you, and in fact, we're going to send out a survey after today's session. I'm hoping you can actually help me conduct a little research on the topic of annual giving purpose. So the survey is going to have just a few questions about your program, what it is you're trying to achieve, and what the priorities are for you. It's only going to take a couple minutes to complete. And I'll actually follow up with you and provide a sort of brief one-pager report that gives you some outline, some things you can do to support those objectives based on how you answered the survey. Let's talk about pipeline development anyway, and why it's important and why I think you should care about this. This is the fundraising funnel, and I love this graphic. It's a play on the marketing funnel that I'm sure you're familiar with. It shows the basic donor journey as individuals, how they become leads, how they make decisions about your brand, your organization, leading to engagement. Now, I've adapted the marketing funnel to be the fundraising funnel. I want to talk about this model and how it works. Any given fundraising organization has a universe of potential supporters, people who, if only they knew about your cause and the impact you make, they would surely consider joining you in your mission and making a gift. And in some sectors, there's a tendency to view this universe of people as limited to those with some sort of existing connection. We see this a lot in higher education, people with a degree. We see it quite a lot in healthcare with grateful patient programs. Or for some organizations, it's a lot about geographical area and people living close to somewhere. For other causes, this universe is viewed as far more limitless, that potentially a donor could come from anywhere in the world, completely out of the woodwork, and become a supporter of the organization. But regardless, you really start with this universe of prospective supporters, and these people are at the top of the funnel. And as these individuals take action, they become a fundraising lead. And examples of this could be attending an event, visiting your website, searching for something on Google, or many other actions. And we're going to look at some of those ideas a little bit later on. And I would even include making a gift as a triggering action, because pipeline development is not necessarily just about getting new donors, but about what you do with those donors as they make their gifts. What is that strategy moving forward? The first step for new leads is to become marketing qualified leads. So you can see here, the leads are generated, they become marketing qualified, which essentially means that on paper, they are ready to be referred to the fundraising team. They meet a certain set of criteria that you've determined that makes them a good prospect. We can talk about lead scoring models a little bit later on. But a few things to keep in mind for a marketing qualified lead is just look at the basics. You're looking for people who potentially are interested in your organization. You don't really need to narrow this pool down too much just yet. Now, lead scoring will help you prioritize the next steps and also categorize people to determine the specific strategies. So a quick example here, if one person registers for an event and another person visits your website, both of these are leads, right? But one person probably is a stronger lead than the other, because the one person who registered for an event comes with a name and an email address and a clear intention to engage. So for this lead, you're probably going to want to do some robust next steps that include some individual outreach. The other person, the website visitor, it's still a lead, but you actually don't have a name and contact information at this stage, and you don't really know anything more about them. They could have visited your website completely by accident. So in this example, your options are a little bit more limited, and something like a retargeting campaign is seeking a conversion of some sort is what you're going to be looking for to help you identify that person and learn a bit more about them. After you have a pool of marketing qualified leads, the next step is to narrow this list to become what in sales is called sales qualified leads, or SQLs, but we're going to call them fundraising qualified leads. And this step involves a bit more verification. This is very often already happening in your major gift programs. Development officers are going to be doing these qualification calls with their donors routinely. They do this with major gift prospects all the time. The only thing different here is we're creating that process to feed those prospects to the development officers. It's just plotted on this fundraising funnel after the marketing qualified lead stage. And in this step, this lead is going to be verified as actually having that interest and the capacity to give at a specific level. So this may be the moment that a prospect is placed under management, or it may simply trigger other warming functions. So if you feel that they're going to be a good prospect in the future, but just not ready for an ask today, that's when you can trigger the warming campaigns. Now, another version of the fundraising funnel can be applied to annual giving and base building programs as well, who are looking to expand their donor base. And in this case, instead of a development officer verifying the interest and capacity, you can actually just use a more robust criteria to automatically qualify donors and use some automated marketing techniques. So if you had the website visitor from the previous example, and then you serve some retargeting ads offering a free download of a custom wallpaper, or some other sort of resource, could be an ebook perhaps. If they do that lead generation tactic, now you're actually going to have their name and email address. They've sort of verified themselves as being interested. And then you can set up automated campaigns to follow up with that individual as well. Point being, the fundraising funnel is highly adaptive. It can really be used to drive that strategy for base level giving programs, mid-level and major gift programs as well. Looks like Emily wants to chime in.
Yes, James, you do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Not sure if you wanted to address maybe one of them now and save a couple for the end, but Zoe Clark did have a question. Although lead scoring can help identify more likely donors, aren't we limiting ourselves by not giving everyone the opportunity to give?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In no way would I say don't give everyone the opportunity to give. I think what lead scoring should do for most organizations, lead scoring is going to help you prioritize and determine exactly what those next steps should be. So it could be that if someone scores pretty high, rather than just straight up like quickly follow up and say, here's an email asking someone to make a gift, maybe the next logical step is a warming campaign and then individual outreach by a major gift officer. That lead scoring, if they score low on that, it doesn't mean discard that prospect. It just means this is somebody that we need to learn more information about, or somebody that perhaps that's when we use the sort of more mass marketing techniques to engage those people, so we can determine which people should be referred to a gift officer and which one should stay in the mass marketing pool.
Great, thank you. And we do have one more. I'm not sure if you want to address it real quick before we continue on. But as Leslie Joyce asks, as the strategist for the entire side of philanthropy, annual, major, principal, do I do a disservice to require a total donor count increase and a retention KPI?
No, I don't think so. I think, first of all, the combination of the total donors and the retention, that's a pretty good start. And this is absolutely normal. I would just add a couple more metrics, and this is a good lead into our next section. But some of the things we'll talk about is, keep an eye on the donor counts, put that in your metrics. Also look at donor counts at certain giving levels. Some of the ones I'll talk about is people giving $100 or $1,000. Start to learn more about those people. Also, you can look at things like first-time donors, renewed donors. It's not a bad thing to count the number of donors. It's a good thing. I think my point is just it's not enough. We should be looking at more than just that number of donors. And there are programs that solely incentivize the number of donors as the singular metric for annual giving. That's where I think we have room to improve, and there's room to add some more metrics that can really represent a more healthy program, a more sustainable annual giving program. Because the problem is with metrics is, however they're intended, managers and individual contributors are going to strive to, meet those targets and improve on those metrics. So if the singular metric is donor count, the typical thing to do is to do everything you can to get as big a number as possible. And that's not necessarily helping you create a sustainable fundraising program. Great questions. Keep those coming. Let's carry on talking about metrics. Great place for that question, actually. Here's a few examples. I put them into a few categories of things you can probably do right away, things you would consider as a next step as you continue to build out your pipeline Powerhouse program, and then some advanced ones, which we'll get to as well. In annual giving, we love our metrics. We are all, data obsessed people very often, and metrics really are used to measure everything. And theoretically, metrics are just that, a way of measuring something. But often that word really gets transposed and it ends up meaning targets or goals. And it ends up being the thing that you're chasing, the thing you're trying to get to and trying to achieve. So you have to ask yourself if you're currently measuring pipeline contributions in your annual giving program. And the thing is, the title of today's session is how to make your annual giving program a pipeline powerhouse. And I think metrics are critical to this. So these are some ideas of things that you could take a look at. Starting with some abstract ideas. The number of leads is a pretty good place to start, but of course you're going to have to define exactly what a lead is, and you're really going to have a way of counting that. So it's a good place to work towards. Another term you're probably more familiar with that is used widely in fundraising is referrals. And I think the many fundraising programs are very comfortable with the idea of referrals. I don't see all that many annual giving programs actually putting that on their metrics. This does start to happen, and this speaks to the poll that we had earlier. There are referrals taking place. So, we come across a donor through our work that we realize is a good prospect for major giving, and we make that referral, or planned giving often happens too. Is that actually on your metrics though? Are you counting how many times that happens? And are you setting targets around that? I think that's key to actually really incentivizing this pipeline work. And then you're going to have the infrastructure, of course, to track that as well, which is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but it should be possible for most people. So do you have the mechanisms in place for effective referrals to take place, and can you measure those? I think back in November, we had one of our next gen annual giving sessions, and we heard from Heather Kopek at the University of Miami, who does fantastic work down there. And she told us that one of her team's objectives, one of her priority objectives for the year, was to get 1,000 good leads. And that's where the lead scoring is going to be important to define what a good lead actually means. And certainly not all leads are created equal. But you want to incentivize that sort of lead generation work, right? So if you're not quite ready to count the number of leads, there's other indicators that you can certainly start to look at in the meantime that are a little bit easier based on the infrastructure you probably already have set up with your database. So things like the number of donors giving at $100 or $1,000. The reason I like this, you'll probably find if you look through your data over the years that donors who are giving $100 renew at a significantly higher rate than those who are giving less than $100, say a $10 donor. That long-term retention, that's good for the pipeline. That's a good indicator that this is somebody making a slightly more meaningful gift, and the $1,000, this is only heightened, much more likely to renew a gift, and it's a much stronger showing of intent and interest in the organization. So that's why I like those two as fairly entry-level metrics for measuring pipeline. You really can come up with a lot of things here, and you can ask yourself some questions. Look at your data and start to analyze, what things make a difference for the pipeline. Look at your current major gift prospects and supporters and look at their journeys and how they started to get engaged. Was there any difference in the types of channels that donor used? Was there differences in the amount of their first gift or the amount of the years they've been giving, these sorts of things? Once you have that data, you can start to create a hypothesis and start testing it and give yourself some metrics and targets to work towards. I think the general point here is do measure more than just the number of donors. Find the indicators of fundraising potential and measure those. And beyond measuring leads, another thing that I think is incredibly important is keeping an eye on the big picture, the ultimate goal. So that's why I have this advanced column. If you really want to be a pipeline powerhouse, I think that means that, if you want your annual giving program to help you close larger gifts, because you want annual giving to help open doors to those prospects, You want to warm those leads and prepare them for the ask. That's where I think you can actually start measuring how many leads resulted in closed gifts at specific metric levels. Even if that gift takes a year or more to close, that's okay, but start to measure it and start to reward it as well. Emily?
Yes, we have a question from Cameron. What qualifies as a good lead?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, again, this is where the lead scoring is going to become important. And I don't think you can necessarily make a universal definition of a good lead. I think it's going to be a little bit tailored to your organization. I have a slide a little bit later on that will answer this a little better. But essentially, to me, in the abstract, it is the likelihood of a lead taking a desired action eventually. So how likely is that to happen? You can look at things like the demographics, information you know about them, behaviors in the past, stuff you already have. You can look at external data, and then you can evaluate the action they've taken that's triggered them to become a lead. But ultimately, what you're trying to decide is this lead, this single individual prospect, likely to become whatever it is you're trying to get to? So if that's a major gift prospect, how likely is that to happen? And that's how you would ultimately define a good lead. There's no universal lead scoring system that's going to work for everyone, though. It's definitely going to be unique to different institutions. And I see another question from Adam. Can you elaborate more on what referrals can look like, and also the best way to do referrals, track referral success, and the best way to celebrate referrals as a metric? Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of these, it really gets to that point of, we all kind of know that this is happening in annual giving. We all believe this is a good thing, but we haven't really done enough to set up the infrastructure for doing that. So what is often happening right now in programs that I've looked at and worked in is that referral is like a manual process that you come across a person and you send an email to a development officer. And one of the problems with that is who knows what happens after that point. Hopefully there's some follow-up. Who knows? There's certainly no tracking. So one of the first things I would encourage people to do is develop a way to actually track that and make that referral formalized in your main CRM database, so that instead of just emailing a development officer, you would add something to the record that indicates that this is a referral, a lead, and then it makes an assignment to somebody at that point. Then you're able to track how many you've had throughout the year, and you'll be able to see what happens with them at that point as well. Because one of the things that you're going to have to look at is, are we making these referrals, and is the follow-up happening? If you start referring thousands of people, you're going to run into a mess with not having enough development officers to be able to do that follow-up. So you're going to have to develop some strategies for doing that within the annual giving program, perhaps. But certainly putting this in your main CRM database is going to be a critical way to setting up that infrastructure. And in terms of tracking referral success as the best way to celebrate referrals as a metric. So again, I think I'd start with counting them. How many can we get? But that's where I'd really love to see more programs start looking at what's in this blue box and the orange box. So how many of these actually become fundraising qualified? This is a critical piece. There's sometimes a tendency to feel a little defensive in the annual giving team that it's not our fault if nobody does anything with this lead. And it's true in many ways, but ultimately this is what we're trying to achieve. It's going to be a team effort. So let's start tracking the number of leads the annual giving team comes up with that then get qualified as a major giving prospect, if that's your goal. And then the next step would be, let's start tracking how many of these leads actually result in a closed major gift. Because that's pretty cool if you can start to show that. And again, these metrics are not going to happen mostly in a single fiscal year.
We are very appreciative of all the questions, but due to respect of time, we will actually start holding the rest of the Q&A questions until the end. But please do continue to submit and we'll answer as many as we can.
Okay. So I think we have the basics in place. We have an understanding of the big picture goal and what we're trying to achieve, and we have the objectives to guide us and the metrics to measure that success. So it's time to look at some different strategies and tactics. Now, there are so many ways to generate leads, and you probably can't do them all. And as you start to develop your program, one of the things you're going to want to do is make an assessment of the opportunities in front of you. Again, this is going to be unique to your specific world. But a few things to think about is that this is really a huge space, and I'm not doing it justice with these kind of 4 categories. These, no doubt, there's plenty more categories, many more ideas that go into these. But you can just start with a blank sheet of paper and just start making a list. What are those opportunities for us? What you're looking for here is ways that people engage with your organization. How are they raising their hand and showing an interest? And how can you learn from their actions and keep track of things? In general, I see a lot of opportunity in these 4 categories: participation, digital activity, traffic, which I got to come up with a better name for that, and giving. I think the important thing here is that you are probably already creating a lot of leads, even if it's kind of difficult to get started. You're probably doing a lot of this work already. You just may not be tracking it and thinking about it in this way. And at the end of the day, leads are just leads. What's important is translating those leads into the pipeline. And that means setting up the protocols and the infrastructure to evaluate the leads, implement warming strategies, and when the time is right, hand them over to a frontline fundraiser to engage. So I'm going to share a few little examples for you, a few anecdotal stuff. At the University of Cincinnati, we set up our digital philanthropy center, and our philosophy here was really meaningful engagement, personal outreach at scale. We did have a fundraising revenue goal as our #1 priority, but we also were tasked with finding new ways to integrate pipeline contributing strategies. So one tiny little thing that we did was set up an automated survey that would go out a few days after the donor spoke with someone by phone. And there's just 3 questions on that survey. They asked about their experience on the call, and then it also asked why they gave to UC. And we were using the VanillaSoft fundraising engagement platform, which is great because it can connect with Zapier, which is an integration tool. That then connects with JotForm. So basically, the survey was sent out automatically. It was set up, no one had to do anything. It goes automatically to the donor. Donor clicks on the link tracks who's filling out that survey. Their responses are automatically sent through Zapier back into VanillaSoft, and ultimately those ended up on their CRM record of that individual as an interaction. Another thing that we could do with Zapier then as well is we used Monday.com as a project management tool. So as those survey responses would come in, it would add an item in Monday.com, which was basically creating a list of follow-up with individuals that needed to happen. So you could then assign a staff member to basically do some triage and go through these leads and say, okay, this is just nice information, no further action needed. This is something that we need to send over to a development officer. And that was another way that we were able to start tracking what we were doing there. I mentioned Miami earlier. I wanted to come back to that one. They have a fantastic online store where you can download digital wallpaper from your computer or for your phone, your iWatch, Apple Watch. And as you download that, they're capturing who you are, your name, email address. But not just that. What they've done is purposely developed assets that are aligned with different programs they have, which allows them, it really allows users to pick things based on their interests, which allows us to learn about what they're doing. So they have wallpapers related to things like cancer research or athletics. And so as people are choosing these, we're starting to understand which types of things they're interested in. And from there, the staff at Miami is able to conduct personal outreach to everybody who downloads these things. And I think a critical piece of this is what they do is they spark a conversation. They don't just immediately follow up with an automated, email asking them to make a gift to something. They're actually starting that conversation person to person and building on that engagement in a small way through that warming campaign. Many organizations do things similar to this, offering ebooks, white papers that are sort of aligned with their missions. So when people download these, they're really indicating an interest and opening the door for that conversation. A final example for you is some work that BWF did with the Non-GMO project last summer. This is a fantastic organization you may be aware of. They verify foods as being GMO free. They have this very recognizable verification mark with the butterfly that you'll see stamped on the packaging of products in the grocery store. Keep an eye out for it next time you're there. So the non-GMO project has this great mission, and they knew that they would have potentially millions of supporters, people who would believe in what they're doing. But they didn't really know who these people were. They'd not been fundraising for that long, so they had no kind of list built up, right? So what BWF helped them do is develop this lead generation campaign, which was done via Facebook. In this case, there was an incentive, which was you could basically enter to win a bike. This was a thing that was selected based on having an understanding of who their audience was and what their interest would be. And this campaign generated over 3,000 leads, which could then be screened and then segmented to determine the specific next steps. So this meant that some could be handed over to have personal outreach from a team member, while others went into a warming campaign for a few months that geared up towards their first giving day, which was in the fall. All right, lead scoring. This can get really complex really quick. But if you're here today, you're probably just starting out with your pipeline Powerhouse. So I really want to make things as simple as we can as a starting point. Basic philosophy here is that lead scoring is to quickly evaluate the opportunity that a lead represents. So to help you determine and prioritize the suitable next steps. So to get started, you'll need to assess what characteristics of a lead indicate the likelihood of those desired future actions. So for example, if you see that people who attend an event have a high likelihood of making a donation, you may want to score this pretty high. Whereas on the opposite side, if somebody clicks on a single link in a single email, that may be not such a great indicator of making a donation, that would get a lower score. Of course, that score could build up over time, the more action any individual takes. There's a number of ways to do this, and a lot of it depends on the tools and technology you have. And sometimes this can be fully automated depending on the sort of main sort of CRMs you have in place. And sometimes it has to be a little bit more manual. You have to rely on some external tools to do that. But you should be able to design a process to sort of do this weekly or monthly to score your leads. Again, this key question is, how likely is this lead to take the desired action? And an ideal donor exercise can really help you in developing your scoring models. So in this ideal donor exercise, you explore the characteristics and attribute of a fictional ideal donor. And it's no good to say, well, you know, any donor is an ideal donor. Sorry, any donor is an ideal donor. Yeah, sure, it is. That's true. But here we're talking about painting a picture of who we should be targeting with our marketing. What are their interests? Why do they support you? And how do they like to engage? And these are some important questions that help you determine that ideal donor, which then allows you to start scoring some of those actions and around the actions and attributes of those leads. And remember, you're not just scoring based on the action. You should also be scoring based on other elements like demographics and capacity. All of these things that have an effect on how likely that individual is to take a desired action. I want to share some ideas for how you can create data-driven audience segments based on donor personas. This can be useful at a variety of stages. So in trying to build an audience like we were with the non-GMO project, or figuring out what you want to do with a list of marketing qualified leads and what kind of warming journeys will be a good fit. Sometimes I talk to clients and they worry that they just don't really have enough data to really segment that audience. We don't know enough about people. But honestly, nowadays, like all you really need is a name and an email address, and ideally a mailing address if you have it. And we can actually help you with this. We can use a partner platform to enrich your data based on external sources. So what that means is we run your data through this platform, and it matches it to lists of millions and millions of external records, analyzing your data to build a more complete picture, an enriched picture of their interests and behavior and their affinity and more. And we're talking about all data outside of your CRM. And because they have access to millions of records and they match with over 1,000 fields, they can really build these models that test hypotheses. So this really starts to come in handy as you start to determine your strategies, because these models can even show you things like channel preference, like how would this group of individuals prefer to be communicated with. That helps you determine what your next steps are. So you get these audience pools, which are grouped together based on commonalities, sort of like cluster analysis. That allows you to create personas, basically. So we have some really rich data about these people. We're able to create these personas to guide messaging. We use that ideal donor profile that we just talked about. So they're actually able to start seeing our audience as a group of individual people and not just this mass pool of sort of unidentified objects. So from here, with starting out with very limited information about these constituents, you're then able to create segmented warming journey campaigns. They're really designed to grow their interest and their engagement in your cause. And the journey can be conducted using email, social media, but also, by all means, incorporate mail and phone into this as well, especially if those channel preferences come up in your research. Happy to talk more about this. You can always drop me an email or find me on LinkedIn to discuss the options for that. I want to talk about engagement-driven programs. We've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm cognizant of time too. I'm speeding up, which I probably was going fast to begin with. But let's shift gears a little bit. As your annual giving program starts to contribute more significantly to the pipeline, you may start de-emphasizing the short-term metrics in favor of the long-term metrics. So what am I saying here? Well, I'm saying that not every strategy and tactic in your annual giving program needs to be designed to secure a gift right away. And I think that's where a lot of programs, that's not really the case. You've got a pretty short window to close that gift. What if that direct mail letter you're sending out today didn't actually contain a reply device or even make an ask at all? Or what if the email you send out didn't even have a give now button? And I know we're all doing stewardship touches. We've all plugged a few things into our calendars to do this. I'm talking about something more than that. I'm talking about intentional strategies to warm these donors. And we're seeing this more and more. I think it's difficult because, quite frankly, as an annual giving leader, you're likely charged with raising money right now, this year. And yeah, you may have some pipeline objectives, so that may be a vague idea, but you have some pretty big goals that you need to reach right away. So that makes it kind of difficult to focus on pure engagement. But we are seeing this more and more, and some tactics that are starting to be put in place to drive that engagement and fuel the pipeline without actually asking for donations. And it makes a lot of sense because in our annual giving teams, we actually have very often, experts in marketing and communications and data analysts and fundraising strategists. And these are often the best people to be responsible for pipeline warming strategies, but they're not being tasked with it. They're not being incentivized for it. It's not in their objectives. So you have to get those things in place if you want to do this work. Our friends over at First Name, an affiliate of BWF, they're doing some of this really well. And they're setting up donor engagement teams with fundraising organizations where the immediate objective sometimes, very often, is not actually to ask for a gift. So in some examples, they're using students to generate content with a heavy emphasis on video, building personal relationships with large number of donors. This idea of personal outreach at scale. I love it. They are currently launching a program with the University of Missouri where students are providing massive amounts of content to power donor warming strategies. And when I say massive amounts of content and massive amounts of video, I'm not talking a few videos. I'm not talking about 50 videos. The students will literally, produce hundreds and hundreds of personalized videos that are tailored to the different segments and the individual donors on their lists. They're also, and this is critical, they are creating these off-ramps. And this is what I really talk about when we think about pipeline infrastructure. What are the mechanisms in place to take things to the next step? So the off-ramps are for warm leads. So when a student's connected and had a conversation with a donor, they feel that they are qualified now. There's a mechanism in place that transfers or refers that donor to a mid-level or major gift development officer. Oftentimes that's going to be a full-time digital development officer. And this is pretty cool. Mizzou are some of the leaders and innovators in this space, so check out what they're doing. Check out First Name. Let me know if you want to talk more about that. I can introduce you to the folks over there. All right, let's look again at our warming journey campaigns, our fundraising funnel. We are on the home stretch here. Nothing like an Englishman using an American phrase. I say that at home and no one has any idea what I'm talking about. Anyway, you have your leads at the top of this funnel and you really need a way to help them move through the funnel and towards that engagement phase. So using the funnel as a journey, this is the ACEs model that we've developed. This is really the basis of the journeys that we set up at BWF: awareness, consideration, engagement, solicitation, and then, of course, stewardship. These are the 4 distinct phases. It's all about how we engage with these prospects. In the awareness stage, this is where we're going to try to generate the lead. We are going to build some trust and get a deeper understanding of the impact that the organization makes. So here, the prospect receives content cadence designed to grow their interest in the organization. And as the journey progresses, we'll begin to collect data on specific interest and affinity. In the consideration stage, this is where we're trying to get to that marketing qualified lead status. Yeah, here we go. So in this stage, the prospect is going to receive a content cadence designed to measure their interest in specific impact areas, and we'll actually start to pair their engagement with capacity and other external data. Then in the engagement stage, that's where we're trying to achieve the fundraising qualified lead status. So especially in a major gift campaign, this is where we would assign that lead to a development officer to make that final qualification in a one-to-one manner. And hopefully, of course, that would lead to a solicitation and close of a major gift. And in the larger volume campaigns, we're working with an annual giving or mid-level prospects. This work can be done either by a student, perhaps, or it could be done through automated marketing, direct marketing, advertising channels. This is where really it all starts to come together. It goes back to that opening point about annual giving teams being uniquely positioned to do this work, if only we can unleash their potential. Because most annual giving teams are most annual giving goals are built around very short journeys. There's an element of churn and burn, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just think there's more that we could do. And well-designed warming strategies that will have zero negative effect on your annual giving program. And in fact, they probably help it. So we're talking about creating content for your audience, learning from their behavior and what they're interested in, and building upon that. That is what I have for you today. Let's recap with some key takeaways, and then we can check in on some questions if we have time. Your annual giving program is uniquely positioned to serve in the function of fundraising, marketing, but taking advantage of this opportunity, it is going to require some intentional innovation. I hope that's what you've picked up from today. Becoming a pipeline powerhouse really does begin with setting the right objectives and implementing appropriate metrics. Third thing, you're probably already generating a whole lot of leads. You just may not quite have the protocols and infrastructure in place to convert those leads into an actual pipeline. And finally, BWF can help you get started on your path to becoming a pipeline powerhouse. Please feel free to get in touch to discuss strategy design, score models, analytics, warming campaigns, and more. Let's see if there's any questions in the chat. I see one about what scoring methodology should be used. So I apologize, I don't know if this question was asked before we, earlier on in the presentation or not, but let's just recap quickly. So the scoring methodology is really going to need to be unique to your organization. There's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. You want to look at what things, what elements of a lead make that person likely to become a major donor or whatever it is. It could be a leadership annual giving donor, could be your goal. So look at those things, and it should include internal data, external data, and the action data. So I'm talking about things like their demographic information, their characteristics. I'm talking about external data about, it could be political affiliations, it could just be other organizations they've supported. And then the third thing would be what action they took and how strong does that indicate a likelihood of continuing to engage. Elizabeth asked, what does personalization at scale look like in practice? I've heard this term a lot in webinars, but I'm always left with 30,000 foot view without any sense of how to practically apply it. Great question. So I don't know, let me try to answer that succinctly. It shouldn't be something that is so high level. It should be a fairly straightforward concept that essentially, we've always kind of done this in annual giving, through our traditional direct mail campaigns. You'd personalize things, you'd put in personal fields. But as the digital world has evolved, I hate the analogies to Amazon knowing what you want to buy before you do, and Netflix knowing what you want to watch, because there's no way that we can compete with these kind of billion-dollar organizations. But I think this is kind of what we're trying to get towards, right? It's unavoidable. Personalized engagement at scale means like creating an infrastructure where you can actually have a conversation with lots of people. So in the Missouri example, the students are creating hundreds and hundreds of videos to personally connect with individual donors. And the same thing at Miami, when those people are downloading those digital assets, it's a one-to-one conversation that's happened. So I hope that kind of provides some clarity around that. Carolyn says, with scoring, is there a scoring that distinguishes donors for an engagement strategy track and a scoring that indicates that donor is ready for engagement with the middle giving officer and for potential referral to a major gift officer? Yeah, so I think what you can do with that is create models based on different objectives. So we've kind of talked today as if you had a singular objective for the pipeline, which very often we've just sort of by default implied is a major gift prospect. And that's not doing it justice. That objective really could be a mid-level giving prospect, a leadership annual giving prospect, or it really could even just be prospects for renewing. If there's organizations with hundreds of thousands of annual donors that need to prioritize everything. So you could absolutely build models and scores for those different objectives, and you could score them differently. If you have that level of complexity, then that's definitely something I would recommend doing. This is going to be a tricky one from Adam, I can tell before I've even read it. If you had to pick 3 to 5 goals for your annual giving program, what would you recommend they be? Dollars, donors, and number of referrals. Yeah, I mean, you almost answered my question. If I had to pick 3 to 5 goals for an annual giving program, I definitely would do dollars raised. That's critical. There's so many caveats with dollars raised for an annual giving program, and I think I would want to tie it to, is it dollars raised through specific activity? Is it sometimes it's at a certain threshold, or sometimes it's for a purpose? So you got to think through that, but some sort of dollars raised goal. I would have the total number of donors I would put on the dashboard, but I wouldn't set that as the goal. I'd set donors at $100 and $1,000 as the actual goal, because if you strive for those things, you're going to boost your overall number of donors by default. And then, I would want to measure some sort of referrals. So ideally, that would be the number of fundraising qualified leads, because that implies a referral that it's actually had something done with that as well. We had that advanced metric of the closed leads. That was one I probably would put on there in the future. But I think the number of fundraising qualified leads would be the last metric I would include. How can annual giving teams adopt a more individualized approach to cultivate mid-level gifts from donors who may not be ready to make major gift for several years? Is there a discrete point at which a major gift officer should get involved? This is a fantastic question. I don't know if I have enough time to do this justice. So this is where really effective warming journeys can be used, and this is where I think there's a huge opportunity, and we're not seeing enough of this happen in annual giving programs. And it comes back to, again, the annual giving team typically is not incentivized to do anything that takes more than 1 year. If that's not going to become a major gift donor for several years, it's hard to dedicate the resources as an annual giving leader to put resources into that. And it's hard as a major gift officer to put your time into that as well. They have, tough metrics as well. So the first thing to do, honestly, is getting those objectives of the program in place, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. Then I would create journeys that targeted specific persona groups, specific segments of people, based on what testing out their interests and learning more about people. I would first create a journey that was designed to get them to become a mid-level donor and to cultivate that, and then put them on some sort of timeline to become a major gift prospect. In terms of when to get the major gift officer involved, really comes down to the resources and the size of the team. Ideally, I would get that major gift officer involved early on for an introduction and a discovery call, make that qualification, that fundraising qualified lead, even if the qualification is this person will be ready in 5 or 10 years, that's okay. I'd still want them to get involved early stage to keep that sort of standardized. And then they don't have to be having lunch with them every month or anything like that. You know, they can keep up some sort of light relationship over the next few years. Well, I think that is all we have time for today. This has been a lot of fun. I hope you found something of value. Please do keep in touch. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. You can also email me. My email address is up there, jbarnard@bwf.com. I will send out that follow-up survey tomorrow. So please just give us a shout if you just give us a few minutes of your time so we can help build our research of annual giving objectives in 2022. Thanks for being here today.